Welcome to the Northern Business Podcast. Each week we talk to people active in business and the economy about the big issues driving growth in the north of England. We're sponsored by Virtue Motors, one of the UK's largest motor retailers. Check out its website at virtuemotors.com. That's VERTU motors.com. I'm Graham Robb. I own Recognition PR. We help scores of businesses promote their products and services, and some are featured on this podcast. Make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. In the studio today, we've Liz Barclay, the Small Business Commissioner for the UK, and Chris Beaumont, partner at Clive Owen LLP. And later, I'll be speaking with Jenny France, who's the Area Director for Merseyside at Lloyds Banking Group. Well, Liz, Chris, welcome to the studio. Liz, first of all, the Small Business Commissioner. Now, this has an element of status and certainly got some gravitas about it. What is the appointment? It's from the government, but what do you do in your office?
I lead an arm's length body. We have a certain degree of independence from the Department for Business and Trade, but we work extremely closely with them. And my brief is to change the payment culture in the UK. So what we're trying to do is to get bigger businesses to pay their smaller suppliers and their supply chains much more quickly, if at all possible, in order that the smaller businesses then, of course, can have the certainty and the confidence to invest and increase their productivity and grow, which, of course, is something that you are extremely interested in.
Absolutely. And in the north of England, it's clear that the number of small businesses are growing a little bit, but they are the engine of growth, aren't they?
They're the engine of growth, but they're also the talent that is helping medium-sized businesses, bigger businesses succeed. So they're driving business success, not only in their own businesses. And I'm talking about freelancers, sole traders, micro businesses, small businesses with up to 50 employees who are agile, they're innovative, and between them they are employing nearly half of the workforce. So it's hugely, hugely important as a sector, and they are hugely contributive to the not just the economy, but also to the social fabric of the UK. And we really need to make the UK a place for, not just to start up, but to really be able to grow and succeed as a small business.
Now, the office has some power and some authority, and in being an almost intermediary, but an intermediary with some power between larger businesses and smaller. Do you find that larger businesses do engage with you, the fact that you have this status as an office of the government?
Yes, they do. And I think increasingly we are seeing big businesses that want to do the right thing. They've understood that their own reputation's at stake. If they're not paying their supply chains well, the reputation's at stake. Investors are less likely to want to invest in them. Really good, talented people are less likely to want to work for them. Young people want a purpose these days. And so big businesses are putting a lot of time and effort into looking at their payment processes, looking at how they can improve them, working in much more partnership and stewardship with their smaller businesses and with their supply chains. Because let's face it, if somebody in your supply chain goes bust, if a link breaks in your supply chain, you've got a supply chain, not just you, but a supply chain that's at risk. And it can be really difficult to replace a really talented supplier of any size within that supply chain.
New technology in the way in which business is changing its face has meant a growth in e-commerce, a really significant growth. And I know you've done some work recently with some of the big e-commerce platforms to make sure that if smaller firms are selling on those platforms, they can get their payments quickly. There have been sticking points in the past. Tell us about what you've been up to and how it's helped.
There are sticking points. And part of the problem is that a lot of the companies, the e-platform companies, have got contracts that are very flexible with their small sellers. And the sellers are signing up to contracts that they don't fully understand. And so it means that the big companies can impose fees, they can add on terms and conditions at all sorts of points along the way. And that has been happening to a certain extent. For instance, over the summer, some of those big companies were holding that money that was due to sellers on reserve for 45 days, in some cases 90 days. Now, if you're a small business, you need that money now. because you cannot carry on functioning. You can't produce more of whatever it is that you sell if your money is being held on reserve, because small businesses don't function in the same way as big businesses. They don't have the reserves to dip into to tide them over a 45-day gap. So we've been working with the big companies to get them to, I suppose, more fully understand how their smaller businesses, smaller suppliers, smaller sellers work.
Now, you do have a power which I know you don't want to use, but it's in reserve, which is to name and shame a big company, which is, I suppose, has been seen as exploiting a small business. By not using the power, have you still been able to get effective results? There are people who call for more naming and shaming, and yes, if we have to use a naming and shaming power, then we will do that, and we have done that in the past. But I would much prefer to work with the bigger businesses, because what I have realised is that sometimes bigger businesses don't fully understand the needs of the smaller businesses they're working with. And if I name and shame, there's no reason why they should ever lift the phone to me again. Yes, it's a nuclear power, isn't it? You don't have to use it.
Exactly. I don't want to have to use it. What I'd much more prefer to be able to do, and my casework team does do, is to work with that business to improve their practices, so that everybody's benefiting from that. And everybody does benefit if everybody gets paid quicker and fairer.
Okay, now let's bring Chris Beaumont in from Clive Owen LLP, the accountants, small business and large business advisors as well. Now, you convened a lunch this week that Liz came and talked at, which had lots of different small businesses from different sectors. What kind of thing was said at the lunch?
I think we actually probably strayed partly outside of Liz's remit. It's actually some of what we actually did discuss. But it's actually, firstly, I think, place thanks on the record for Liz to actually come up and actually meet with us.
Pleasure.
Because obviously I think you were with ministers yesterday. I think you were in Worcester tomorrow. So a very busy individual. But today we sort of went through things like the national minimum wage. And obviously a sizable increase occurred sort of at the beginning of this tax year on that. And that's obviously having some substantial impact on business. And it's making business people think about whether they actually take on sort of the apprentices or the younger generation. Because now you're looking at sort of £23,000-ish for a sort of somebody that you're going to be taking on. And it's then, do you actually on that individual, or do you look at things like artificial intelligence, as was mentioned this morning? We also sort of touched on things like the VAT threshold, and actually whether that should, with the level it's at the moment, is that a disincentive to businesses? Because you'll get them actually trying to grow to the VAT threshold and then go, oh, no, we don't take any more because our prices suddenly have to go up 20%. And that will sort of stop businesses wanting to expand. We also touched on things like the sort of the education and the interface between sort of business and that education field, and sort of how that does or doesn't work at this moment in time. And I think probably the conclusion is it doesn't work as well as it should do.
Yes.
And therefore there is that disconnect, and we do need to find a way of actually reconnecting business and education together on that side.
Now, Liz, the government does have a minister that's responsible for small business, and you speak to him. I think it's Kevin Hollingrake. That's fine, thank you. Is this kind of thing, although it's not within your late payments remit, do you pick up this kind of thing and take it back to the government?
Yes, I do. And I do talk to the minister about all sorts of aspects of small businesses, because payments fit into every aspect of small businesses. If you're not getting paid by your big customer quickly enough and you don't have the confidence, you don't invest in upskilling, in retraining, in taking on apprentices and so on. So we really do have to make sure that payments is centre of all of these other aspects of running a business.
You told a good anecdote, without naming the businesses involved, at this lunch about how sometimes people who run large corporate businesses have never really run a small business. They haven't necessarily paid a VAT check themselves, and they haven't had the burden themselves on their personal finance of paying a wage. And you told an anecdote about a small business run by a mother of one. Tell that anecdote now.
Yes, she phoned on a Friday afternoon and said, I have nothing to feed the children with over the weekend. And she had been owed £300 for several months by a big business. The caseworker phoned the big business, eventually got through to the CFO. The chief financial officer said, nobody's ever had this discussion with me before. I thought it's only £300. It's not a big deal. It can wait till Monday. He said, I have paid £30,000 invoices this afternoon to clear the desk for Friday. He said, now I get it. I understand. I will not leave her bereft of money over the weekend. I'll pay it out of my personal account. And on Monday morning, I'm going to look at our payment processes and think about how they could be made to work better.
So you didn't just solve it for the woman concerned. You also made a change in custom and practice at that larger firm.
And that is what we were set up to do, was to change the culture. And in some businesses, there is a culture that doesn't really fully understand how important £300 is to a small business. A week without that £300 can be existential. And that's the kind of message that we have got to work really hard to get across.
So, Chris, the anecdote you heard at the event and the kind of passion that came out from some of the small businesses, not just about late payment, about the other matters, are you seeing this as an issue generally within your business cohort? Because you look after all manner of businesses, don't you? Cash flow being the lifeblood.
Well, cash flow is the lifeblood. I mean, I usually go on about sort of turnovers being vanity, sort of profit being sanity, and cash being reality.
Right.
And trying to get clients to actually focus on that bottom line. And for some clients, it is a major problem. I've got a few clients at the moment which are having problems getting money from their sort of larger companies. Monty, for instance, they've unfortunately taken on about 55 employees. So they've taken on just over your remit of 50 at the moment.
I can still come and talk to you.
I suspect he will be coming to talk to you in due course. Because it is stopping them in that particular instance actually being able to invest and sort of take on additional people, because actually the monies are not coming through, as you said, as quickly as they should be to enable those things to happen.
And the thing that also small businesses, on average, spend 3.5 hours a week chasing invoices.
Yeah.
That's productivity there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we need it being productive.
And the larger businesses, I mean, just without suggesting that utilities haven't got their act together, utilities being an example of a large business will very often be paid sometimes in advance. I pay my electricity bill in advance. There's a standing charge, you pay it. And similar bills like the TV license are paid in advance. So it's not as if the larger businesses don't have the cash they need. They're not waiting on invoices, are they?
Well, I don't deal with utilities and telecoms because there is an ombudsman.
Fair point.
There is an ombudsman for that.
And I'm not suggesting any... Yeah,
which is really useful. So if you do have a problem on that front, go and talk to the utilities and the energy and telecoms ombudsman.
Right.
But yes, you're absolutely right. A lot of the bigger businesses do have the reserves in place. But of course, big businesses have got lots of competing needs that they need to spend money on. So they want to do research and development. They want to do whatever, thinking about business planning and buying a merger, for instance, something, and so all those different departments are coming along to whoever holds the money in that business and saying, but hang on a minute, I need this amount of money. And we're talking about millions in lots of cases. So if I come along as the CFO and say, I need to pay my suppliers quicker, and the treasurer says to me, how much does that entail? And I say 2.5 million, he's going to think twice, she's going to think twice and say, not so sure, because actually we need to spend it on buying that business over there.
Yes, exactly.
And so, of course, everybody's got to make their compelling case.
You're right. But that also puts the smaller business in the position of a de facto shareholder or de facto banker.
Yes, it does. And my argument to big businesses is you cannot do that. You cannot use the small business as a bank funding your acquisition of that business over there. It's just not fair treatment.
And Chris, as a financial an accountant with larger and smaller businesses, do you try and discourage your larger businesses from doing it as well? I mean, you may have to wear two hats occasionally.
You could have to wear two hats occasionally, you say, on that. But actually, in reality, I would like to think a lot of the clients we're dealing with, although they are sort of large for the region, they're actually not in the sort of scheme of those big multinationals that we're talking about. And they actually get, because they actually sort of live and breathe and actually work. And in a lot of instances, as I was saying earlier, they've actually set up their own businesses, had to do the first VAT checks themselves. So a lot of them actually understand the implications and actually want to sort of make those payments on time. I know with actually just signed up to the charter today, actually.
The prompt favourite.
Yeah. I'll be perfectly honest, we've always done it, but it seemed the right thing to do. Early in today's edition to actually sign up. And actually something we should probably get more businesses to actually do is actually sign up to the charter and actually pledge and actually tell people what they're doing, especially their suppliers, so actually the suppliers know.
Well, it's a handy prompt for me to ask Liz about the charter, because you've got a sort of good practice guide, haven't you?
We've got the prompt payment code, yes. And the code is a voluntary code, but you commit to paying at least 95% of your invoices within 60 days and at least 95% of your invoices from small businesses within 30 days.
Right.
And so getting the big businesses to sign up to that, to make that commitment, is really, really important, because that's thought leadership there. Yeah. And if we can then get them to say to other businesses along their supply chain, we'd like you to do this too, then it would be great.
Just to finish this part of the programme, do you find that in your experience, small businesses sometimes have difficulty getting finance? Because we're going to talk to a bank soon. And what issues are presented to you in that field?
I think there's a number of issues at the moment. I've had 2 small charities of late actually just had the banks sort of closed because the bank couldn't get to their money laundering procedures and weren't comfortable with them. So it's becoming more difficult. And as the number of branches have been closed, the threshold to which a bank manager actually automatically allocated to a client has moved up and up and up. I mean, it wasn't that many years ago that every business in the UK would have who their bank manager was.
Yes.
Now with some of the banks, you're looking at sort of £10 million of turnover plus before you actually have a named individual. I'd say it's got more difficult to actually know who to speak to about any issues and therefore get the finance that you actually want to put in place without some appropriate advice.
And this is a common banking relationship type of issue that some of your client group see?
Oh, it's interesting that you should mention this. The all-party parliamentary group for access to finance had the launch of its manifesto last night in the House of Commons. And what they were saying is that there are something like 140,000 small business bank accounts that have been closed. There's obviously this issue about not understanding the risk that a small business presents, because you're not perhaps as close to that small business as you once might have been. But then, of course, there's banks, lenders who don't want to be playing in that arena. They'd much rather have the bigger businesses, and so therefore the challenger banks are extremely important. CDFIs have a role to play. Credit unions may well have a role to play in the future. But also for me, I think it's about getting the right support for a small business before you apply for that finance, so that you know you're going to be able to answer all the questions that the lender is going to ask you, and you're going to have all that information to hand, and that you are funding ready. And sometimes the small business goes along, asks for funding, doesn't get it, and just goes away. Yeah. And really, if they had been ready for funding and asking for the right funding at the right time for the right stage in their business, the outcome may have been different.
And I know you handhold a lot of businesses in that respect, don't you?
Yeah, we do. I mean, getting together a proper business plan so you can actually go to the banks to actually sort of explain what you're doing, why you're doing it, why you need their money, and just sort of doing some sensitivity on it so they can actually sort of see what the risk factor is for themselves is exceptionally important.
Well, Chris, Liz, thank you for joining us for this part of the Northern Business Podcast. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham.
And next, my interview with Jenny France, Area Director of Merseyside at the Lloyds Banking Group. Well, joining me now is Jenny France, who's Area Director for Merseyside with Lloyds Banking Group. Jenny, welcome to the Northern Business Podcast. We were talking to the Small Business Commissioner and also to a leading accountancy practice in the northeast of England, and they did make a comment about banking, that sometimes with small businesses, banking's got a bit more remote. You can't always get in touch with a personal advisor and get a bit of advice or get a query resolved. It's quite often just a sort of logarithm on the computer. Is Lloyds Bank cracking that?
I have a team of 8 relationship managers and directors who look after businesses that turn over from 3 million up to 25 million. And all those relationships are actually face-to-face. So my team will go out and see the clients at the businesses. I'll go out with them to see them. And we are very much a hands-on business bank who look to support and get to build relationships with the clients. Because if we can build a relationship with them, then we can help support them more.
Excellent. Now, the bank that you're running, your area, is Merseyside. Now, how is the Merseyside economy shaping up, and what are the opportunities in that economy for businesses to grow?
Okay, so the bank's does a business barometer called the Northwest Barometer, which it undertakes every single month. And over the last 4 months, we've seen 2 months of confidence growing with businesses and 2 months of decline. I don't actually think this is causing any concern because obviously inflation is falling more slowly than we'd hoped, but business confidence could just be reflecting that shift in the economic landscape. From the businesses that I've been out and seen recently, and I was at 3 client meetings just on Tuesday last week, they were all very confident in their current climate. They didn't seem to be concerned. So although we're seeing press telling us there's still a lack of confidence, we are actually seeing that the Northwest businesses are seeing growth and expecting to grow in the next 6 months.
Well, there's nothing better than first-hand experience to beat the press reporting. I suppose if you're getting that first-hand from looking at the businesses that you're visiting, that's what really counts. And are there any in what Merseyside? It's a large economy, really. Merseyside, a city-based economy around Liverpool and the associated sub-areas. Is there a dominant sector that's driving growth, or is it all sectors lifting?
We have a very varied client portfolio, so we see a broad spectrum. Clearly, one thing that we have seen an increase in particularly since Eurovision is the hospitality industry, with hotels, tourist attractions, restaurants, etc., which is bringing more investment into the area. A lot of businesses in tech and media also are seeing a lot of growth, and our manufacturers in particular are also seeing confidence in what they're expecting to see in the next 6 months. So it is across all sectors. Manufacturers in particular recorded an increased score of 45% on our recent barometer on increased confidence. So, it feels very positive from the people we're talking to.
Yes, and of course, starting the point you first made, Liverpool itself does have a distinct culture that's worth experiencing.
It does.
My family comes from Liverpool. I do remember going to visit family and feeling as though it was a different part of the north. It does stand out. It's very distinctive.
It is very different to other parts of the country. Part of my patch goes further north as well, but you can see a different distance, different in the Merseyside region.
Now, what kind of financial tools is your banking group offering to SMEs that want to grow their businesses?
Wow. So we've got the traditional tools such as loans, but we also have some unique tools. So we have something called a working capital management tool, which allows us with clients, or they can actually access it themselves as well, to look at the working capital and how they can maximise the position, potentially without actually having to borrow any money at all, so without a cost. But also if they do need more working capital, then we can provide various aspects of finance, such as asset finance to buy equipment or wheels, manufacturing kits. We can also provide invoice financing, so we can fund the short-term gap on getting paid by the debtors. We can also look at some more whizzy things, such as capital import finance or helping them with trade facilities if they're importing. And those who are also looking to export, we have something called the International Trade Portal, which they can go on and they can look for businesses who may want to buy their product abroad, and actually look at potentially also trade fairs they could attend, or who they need to contact at that business to help them get in with the purchaser.
That really is an holistic set of small. When we were talking with a small business commissioner at a lunch in the northeastern Yorkshire earlier today, she was pointing out that there isn't a sort of governmental gateway that automatically offers support and advice. It seems that what you're doing there is hand-holding the businesses that you've identified as clients that can grow. It seems that you are providing something that can't be found elsewhere.
Hopefully, yes. The two tools that we operate, the working capital management tool and the International Trade Portal, they are, as I understand, unique to what we can do, but it's also accessible we can give access to non-clients as well if businesses want to look at it.
Last question, because we're just about running out of time. A lot of businesses focus now on sustainability. Quite often that's seen as green sustainability, but sustainability, I suppose, can involve sort of supply of new skills and supply of new technology. Is sustainability one of the things that you're looking at when you decide whether a business can access the kind of finance that you offer?
So sustainability is very much high on our agenda, and we're doing as much as we can to support our clients to be sustainable. We have something called the Clean Growth Financing Initiative, where we can offer discounted lending for green purposes through this initiative. And this will be eligible investments such as low carbon vehicles and transport, improving water efficiency, reducing waste, or perhaps improving recycling rates or reducing the carbon and greenhouse emissions. And we can support with that by obviously not just the finance side with discounted rates, but also we can help them become more sustainable. We have something called a Clean Growth Audit, which actually the business can access and look at themselves and look at areas where they can look at their own emissions that they can control, such as the processes, the company-owned vehicles, their on-site heating facilities. Then they can look at indirect emissions, such as electricity, heat or steam they purchase. Then we can look at indirect ones, such as people within the supply chain, looking upstream, such as raw materials, and then downstream, such as distribution and storage. And we can help them work through that to help them become more sustainable.
Well, Jenny, thank you for that. And thank you for joining us today on the Northern Business Podcast. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, I want to thank my producer, Harry Sinclair, and technical operator, Robin Campbell. If you want to join us on the Northern Business Podcast, get in touch with me, Graham Robb, on LinkedIn. Join us next time. Don't miss an episode. Like, rate and subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.